So what you do to stamp on a painting is you put it on the floor, put on hobnail boots, and jump up and down. I use stamping to get some nice detail in the painting. I also love the fact that I have less control with stamping. I can get interesting details, shapes, patterns that I could never get with a brush. So to stamp, I apply the paint to the stamp in a variety of ways. One is to just dip it into the paint that's on my palette. Since I don't want the paint in the grooves of the stamp, I use paint on my palette that's spread out and not very thick. When I apply the paint with a brush, I use a flat brush, flat or a filbert, and I spread the paint over the top of the stamp carefully, again, so that it doesn't go down into the grooves. Sometimes I'll use more than one color, and I'll just put, for example, turquoise and quinacridone gold on different parts of the stamp and let them kind of run together and put that on to get who knows what kind of effect. When I stamp onto a painting, I almost always stamp more than once with the same stamp. It creates an area of pattern. I can use a stamp that's quite simple. I've carved some that are just a little triangle, a little series of dots together, a little small square, some lines, and then I'll put those, using the same stamp repeatedly, I create a pattern. Another thing I'll do is, say for example, if I want to lighten an area and it's a blue color and I want it to read just a little lighter, I may stamp the entire area with a value, similar color, just a little lighter. The effect is to lighten the whole area, but it has this little subtle pattern. There are so many ways to use a stamp. You can apply paint using the stamp, and you can also remove paint and create texture using the stamp. So you want to first start by putting on a nice thick layer of paint, not too thick. Take your stamp and set it carefully into the paint and remove it without smearing it, because otherwise you'll get weird edges. You now have paint on your stamp, and you can put that onto the board or paper or whatever in some other part of the painting. You'll end up with the figure of the stamp shows up, but also you'll have kind of a texture built up. One thing to think about is integrating the layer of stamping into the rest of the painting. One thing that can happen is that the stamping can stand out too much if you're not careful. I do a couple of things to work with this. One is that I sometimes don't, and quite often I don't paint onto the stamp right to the edges, because then I don't have that hard-edged line. It's easier to integrate then. To integrate the stamping into the rest of your painting, use a dry brush technique. Take your brush out of the water and dry it off nicely on a rag or a paper towel. Dip into paint that's fairly dry, not soupy, and lightly go across parts of your stamping with the color that makes sense for what you're integrating to. Keeping your stamps from blop. Cleaning your stamps is really important. If you're right in the middle of something and you don't have time to go to the sink and clean it off, throw it in your wash water so that the paint doesn't dry on and fill up the lovely little grooves that you've made. When you clean the stamp, run it under water, and one thing I like to do is spritz it with a spray bottle, because that can really get into the little grooves, and that's what you want to do. The paint will probably stain the stamp, but that's okay. You just want to make sure the paint's off.